It's intro time, and it is time for Flywheel, your number one source for everything FrxETH, DeFi, and everything in between. If you want to know what's going on in the world on chain, well, you've come to the right place. This is DeFi Dave here with capital K, and we are here to help you harness the power of the Flywheel. And this time, we're bringing power back to the projects. We're bringing power back to the investors because we have on Ryon Nixon, who lays out the whole landscape of what's going on in the world of structuring, what's going on in the world of raising, and what's going on in the world of even like litigation. And we got some spicy war stories here. I just want to reiterate, nothing here is legal advice, but things we get real deep in the weeds here. Kit, what are your thoughts?
You know what I'm going to say, bro. Listeners and the audience, grab your pen, grab your paper, and take notes. And especially if you're a founder kind of early into your founding journey, there's going to be a lot of legal insights here that, Ryon is being very real and delivering only the if you know, and speaking from experience. Just for a quick recap, he was a previous general counsel of Solana. He's, helped projects navigate through millions and millions of fundraising. And he's also helped project navigate through SEC, informal and formal investigation. So,
Yeah. And my favorite part is at the end, how we tie everything together and show people hey, there's FUD out there, but you should just keep building and remember why we're here. And if you want to see every episode of Flywheel, every time we come out with something, make sure you hit that bell button, subscribe, leave us a like, let us know what you think in the comments. You can follow us on Twitter at FlywheelDeFi. Make sure you follow us on Telegram. Join the conversation over there at FlywheelDeFi. You can follow me on Twitter at DeFiDave22.
Follow me at 0xcapital_K.
Subscribe to our Substack, FlywheelDeFi.com. And let's get the flywheel spinning.
ਦਿਲ ਪਰਦੇਸੀ ਨੂੰ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਨਿਤ ਦਾ ਰੋਣਾ ਪੈ ਜਾਊਗਾ ਨਾਲ ਰੰਜੇਟੇ ਜੋਗੀ ਦੇ ਤੈਨੂੰ ਜੋਗਣ ਹੋਣਾ ਪੈ ਜਾਊਗਾ ਜੇ ਇਸ਼ਕ ਦੇ ਅਲਿਆਂ ਜ਼ਖਮਾਂ ਦੇ ਖੁਦ ਹੱਸ ਕੇ ਮੂੰਹ ਸੀ ਲਾਂਗੀ ਜੇ ਯਾਰ ਮੇਰਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਜ਼ਹਿਰ ਦੇ ਮੈਂ ਘਟ ਘਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਪੀ ਲਾਂਗੀ
Do you hold ETH but don't know what to do with it? Want to earn those juicy liquid staking derivative yields but don't know where to start? Well, FrxETH is there for you. FrxETH is Frax's native LSD solution, allowing you to earn boosted yields in multiple ways on your ETH. If you want to get started, go to app.frax.finance and turn your ETH into FrxETH today. Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of Flywheel. I'm your host, DeFi Dave, here with capital K, and today we have returning to the pod super lawyer Ryon Nixon and
the legend,
the legend himself. But before we get into anything, nothing here is legal advice. Nothing. Go consult with your lawyer if you want legal advice. Hire Ryon if you want, but nothing. Here's the disclaimer: nothing here is legal advice. Ryon, he's been a busy man at Horizons. A lot going on, especially in the U.S. over the past 6 months since we last talked. And I think something that everyone wants to know. Is it safe for U.S. crypto companies in the U.S. right now? What is the current environment right now? And how has it changed in the past 6 months?
Sure. As far as running a company in the U.S. So I think there are a lot of schools of thought. I do know there is real data that a ton of projects are leaving the U.S. It's a shame to see, right? I think you can blame regulatory uncertainty. You can blame a lot of things. But I will say, and this is law, right? Under Reg D, you can raise as much money as you want or up to a certain amount, subject to some requirements, right? That is law passed by Congress that cannot be affected by anything Gensler says or does. I still think, and we can talk a little bit more about structuring if that's what you'd like to later, but as far as projects being able to raise money in the US, properly set up their offshore structure, if that's part of it, which I think at this stage it really is. I don't think there isn't an easier way to do it than in the US. Now, to do that, you have to operate subject to some exception or exemption, right? And that's Reg D or Reg S. Without that, it's very hard for a lot of these projects that are US based to be able to pull capital together, because it takes maybe 6 figures for some of this offshore structuring, regardless of the jurisdiction. How are they going to do that? How are they going to raise that without the entity? It's the chicken and the egg problem, right? So projects raising in the US, raise under Reg D, consult a lawyer, do your structuring properly, comply with 144. I do think that is still the best way right now for projects that are US based to continue to raise here. Unfortunately, I think there's been a lot of mixed messages in the space, but I mean, there still are a ton of projects that are raising under this exemption or exception, one of the two. And I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. I do wish that like Gensler could say one thing and it would be very like political and would be good for him because it'd be a lawyer thing to say because it says something but doesn't say much, but it would at least give comfort. Like he could come out and say, hey, said this about disclosures, said this about this, transparency, whatever. Projects in the US can properly raise under Reg D and Reg S, right? Crypto projects. If he said just that, it really wouldn't change anything as far as status quo, but it would give a lot of comfort to projects in the space. I always get asked that. And it's like, yeah, here's one thing he could just put that on Twitter. Man, it would be a big boom, right? Basically for the space, at least for now. And so, we get some regulatory clarity, and I think it would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Got it.
Could you imagine if Gensler actually says that on Twitter, it'd be such a change of tone from what we're used to seeing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it was like, and what would it do? He could still keep everything else he said, right? All his other statements would still apply, but it would at least give projects that like, hey, they're not going to be targeted unreasonably just because they want to stay in the US, which the US government, the US regulators, the US people have a vested interest in keeping this economic activity over here, right? So
yeah. And you mentioned something about misconceptions that people may have right now. Could we go into that a bit more? Like, what are the biggest misconceptions around being in the US right now?
Sure. Yeah. I think there are a lot of misconceptions. I think there is a ton of FUD. I think US founders, listen, you can receive tokens, have them locked up for a year, have them locked up for longer, restricting those tokens, regardless of that they're utilities, securities, or some weird new thing in between. That's okay, right? There are laws that deal with restricted securities, right? I think one of the things that isn't explicitly said by a lot of lawyers in the space, and frankly, I think sometimes we are like directly explicit as well with projects, is when they raise, again, just as I said prior, we treat it as if it could be a security, right? Well, if the SEC does come after you, it's like, hey, again, we relied on a valid exception, let's say. Well, what's the problem? There are laws and there are processes for dealing with restricted securities. Just because you're a token founder and you're going to get a big chunk of tokens, whatever, as your founder's allocation, lock it up, restrict transferability. And conversely, if like the space wants like some real tips, I do think, this is something me and my firm at Horizons have advocated for a long time. And we found sort of a renewed interest is in transparency, right? Disclose that on your DAO forum, put on there, hey, here's what team vesting looks like. Here's when it starts. You don't have to go item by line item. Here's every person with their wallet and their address and their social. Yeah, no, don't do that. But you can say team, this much, this percentage, this is when vesting starts. The greater transparency, the greater disclosures, I do think is good for the space. I do think is good for participants in the space. And, not to be controversial because everybody hates Gensler, I do think that is the one thing that he's said that I've agreed with. He's probably said some other things, but the disclosures piece, the being like increasing transparency, I don't really think, let me say it this way. My firm, we spent a lot of time looking at SEC committee regs on transparency, disclosures, like try to like derive these rules. I do think that this is something that the crypto space could really like focus on, especially right now, is here. Like, let's show everybody why on-chain's better. why crypto is more transparent. It's not just, oh, I can track, your wallet address. It's here are like DAO forums with like great educational tools on what this is, on what tokens do, on how to use stuff. Here are sort of under the hood, maybe, not as like bright and shiny facts, right? Here's what the team gets. Here's what investors get. Here's what the lockups look like. Oh, you want to give investors really short lockups, a little over a year, let's say, still being compliant, et cetera, right? Not legal advice. But let's say you want to do that, right? You get pushed by your lead to give them a good deal. Well, tell the lead, hey, we got to disclose this, right? I mean, projects in that way can also, take the power back a little bit from VCs with this sort of focus in mind, right?
Right.
The greater transparency, the greater these disclosures, the greater a person can like jump on a project's website or DApp and click around and learn things. I think the better for everybody. So, yeah.
It's not just about this virtual signaling about the chain being transparent. It's about like actually showing, utilizing like, hey, these are when the lockups are due. Hey, like, look at this, like using the power of the chain. And I just think about in terms of transparency, Kit, you saw Frx's balance sheet the other day, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Ryon,
and that block by block balance sheet was great. So Ryon, Frx released a balance sheet of literally assets and liabilities of every single holdings for the Frx stablecoin. So you could go in there and go line by line to figure out that transparency. But what you were speaking about is like off-chain transparency, right? And that is like bringing all of that. Exactly, both, right? But being able to deliver both. And that's kind of like the ethos of crypto already. But actually, Ryon, I want to take a step back and ask you the kind of the nuances between a safe with token warrants, price rounds. Like, could you walk us through all these kind of different instruments and kind of the implications?
Sure. Last quick thing before we go to this, if I can, just show one other really, I think, special thing. And it's manageable is when I was at Solana Foundation, Solana Labs, there was this idea of a transparency report. Solana did some. I don't know where they're at right now. I don't work with them anymore. But this idea of like a 3 or 6 month, here's where everything's at. Here, almost like projects do for investors, right? Here's our investor update. Like that is something else projects can adopt, a transparency report that they maybe give to investors. They have available on their forum. Paragons, which is a DAO that I'm a part of and co-founded, had a massive 30-something page, transparency report showing everything they've done, some of the losses. They spent some money on this for, to try to close this deal. It didn't work. I think that is just a very valuable thing that projects should consider and try to adopt as best they can. And again, I don't think it would be much different than sort of these investor updates with maybe some things redacted. Again, contact a lawyer. Don't just publish all this private stuff about your investors without someone actually reviewing it. So sorry, Kit, what was your next question?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to ask you to help, if you could explain it like I'm 5, the different types of funding instruments, right? These are all these acronyms like a SAFE, like a Saphs, like a SAFE with a token warrant, and or price round, how that differs and the implications of each of these instruments.
Sure. So to go through all of them in real detail would probably take, more than an hour or so. So I'm just going to give the overview, right?
Yes.
Saphs are more a function of fully offshore teams, right? So where none of the founders, really anybody is in the US, and they were mostly used for everybody last cycle, right? Saphs have fallen under scrutiny because since the Saphs contemplates this token, the Saphs be the security and the token can be the security, right? And there's arguments that it could be other things as well, but that's the long and short of it, right? In this environment, in this cycle, we typically will see Saphs when a team is a European team and all of the entire team is European, fully European structure, maybe a Swiss structure. We've seen them sometimes with the Cayman BVI structure, but typically it's an offshore team because in my opinion, and I think this is why you still see them over there, Saphs just sort of makes sense. It's an agreement for tokens when they come out. You pay a certain amount for the token. It's very simple agreement. Like the understanding is very clear. You get what you pay for, right? Safes or simple agreement for equity, right? And with the accompanying token warrant, that is more of the vogue right now in the US. And so what those basically say is, hey, we're going to invest mostly in equity, right? In exchange for this mostly like 99% investment into equity, we'll get a warrant that if and when there's a token, we'll have a de minimis exercise, meaning we'll have a very small exercise of the warrant to get the tokens. Now, again, it just feels a little bit weird that investors are going to invest into a project for equity. Now, safe the token warrants typically are onshore in the US, sort of what I was talking about earlier, right? Like under Reg D. We have seen in this cycle, because of all the regulatory uncertainty, a lot of safe and token warrants running through a Cayman LTD or like the corporation equivalent in the Cayman Islands. That's okay. I just think it's again, a little unnecessary, and it is, it adds more to cost for projects, which again, I'm not really a fan of. So what a safe and token warrant says, I'm going to give you most of this money that runs to the equity. And because my investment goes to the equity, it's less likely that the warrant, which is sort of this ancillary agreement, this isn't the real part of the agreement. This is the real meat of the agreement, the equity. The warrant is less likely to be seen as like a securities offering, as including what the warrant contemplates, which is the token, right? So for example, I do a $1 million investment into Kit's project, which is sick, and it's going to moat, right? Sick. Not financial advice.
So no advice interview.
No advice here.
No advice.
I give Kit $1 million for his equity and his Delaware C Corp, right? And then it will have a warrant that should be fulfilled by typically an offshore structure, a Cayman BVI structure, maybe a Swiss structure, right? Now, of the $1 million, I give $1 million for this equity. Again, there's a lot of variations of this and it can always take different shape, but typically it's a de minimis exercise, meaning 0.1% of the investment amount of equity is what it takes to exercise your warrant. So what is that? What's 0.1% of $1 million? $10,000, right? So it's, but now let's make it real. So Kit has his token, he has his TGE, right? The token does well. I exercise 1,000 for the warrant. This is where all the value is, right? And what I got from the warrant. And I have this equity in his C Corp. Like Kit's been pretty public with, with me, with others that like, hey, this is just a token play that, this onshore piece will support it. But I mean, be pursuant to the DAO could get voted out. So this DevCo could even get voted out pursuant to governance and now have no control at all, right? And that's like sort of part of decentralization, right? Is it can't always be just the core team supporting it. If they do a good job and they earn it, fine. But if other projects threw the hat in and they've done it, they're going to do a better job, or they come from another protocol. Well, that's the name of the game, right? That's the name of decentralization. So, adding some like numbers to it as an example, I think it makes the point clear where it just doesn't make that much sense. Now that said, again, in this kind of tricky climate, I am more of a fan of this approach because I do think it is more conservative, even if, let's say, again, the Saphs model is just makes better sense for token raises, right? Let's say that. I am way more of a fan in the US of the safe and token warrant model for any sort of raising, through a Delaware C Corp. Lastly, price rounds. Price rounds are not just a SAFT, which is a SAFE, which is a simple agreement for equity, future equity, right? Simple agreement for future equity. Said it right. We're actually going to give you equity. So you have to go through, there's usually like 4 docs. It's an investor, it's a, stock purchase agreement, right of first refusal, investor rights agreement, and a voting rights agreement. Right. And projects that want to like check out what these docs look like can go to the National Venture Capital Association website, the NVCA website. They're free forms. again, I would definitely, for any founders that don't have a legal background, I would absolutely talk to a lawyer because they're long, they're annotated. The whole point of price rounds for the investors is they get equity, they get control, they can enforce, they can bring a derivative claim, whatever, right? Safes cut that, right? Because they don't have actual equity. They have a right to future equity. And so under a safe, just to back it up, a safe will be a right for future equity. It's usually like the next round or the second round after the safe round. And it usually triggers at a certain amount, but it can also be upon the second round. It has to be a price round. Or if they raise over $10 million in an equity financing, then it triggers into a price round. The point of waiting with safes is, price rounds, they cost $50,000, $40,000 just to get all the structuring done, to issue equity and get it, properly portioned, talk to tax people. There's a lot that goes into it. That's why in the Valley or just in fundraising in general, a safe in the token world makes a lot more sense. It costs less than fees versus doing a full price round. And that's why you don't see as many of them.
Got it. Okay, so let me just recap really quick across the three. So a Saphs is a simple agreement for future tokens, and that is much popular for offshore, whether it be in Europe or elsewhere, but just non-US. Like that's kind of like the way to go because it's the most simplest.
Is non-US, and it's typically we've seen them mostly with European teams, but I mean we have seen some Cayman Saphs as well. Yeah,
right. But that's like the most simplest because effectively you are only investing in the project for the tokens, not really equity. But in the US, we kind of have to hide behind this veil of a safe plus token warrant, where the actual safe, which is the simple agreement for future equity, is where all the quote unquote meat of the investment is going into. And then there's this ancillary agreement about tokens sometimes down in the future with a tiny amount of exercise cost. All right. And that's the structure just to, put on this veil of protection. But in reality, the play is for the token. And then lastly, we have a price round, which is just your regular old equity round. Investor puts in cash, they receives equity, but that is extremely expensive for a startup or an early project to kind of go through. Like you said, it costs almost $50K just to get the basics complete.
And not so good old fashioned price round. That's the old school way.
That's the old school way. Yeah.
The old school way.
And I wanted to ask about the safe and token war. It feels very soft, right? Because what's going on there? The office is coming apart. The fans are listening.
Those price rounds are real heavy, guys. It's heavy.
Nobody's listening in.
Well, that's a flywheel first, everyone.
Sorry.
I think your Zoom background is glitching out.
I'm getting SIM swapped. I'm getting hacked.
Yeah, that was really funny. Oh my god, let's keep going.
I was like, wait, I think it's
so. Yeah.
So
just to recap it then. So just to recap, I think Saphs make the most logical. They're the simplest type of agreement that gives investors and projects just exactly what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. Again, I think because of the regulatory uncertainty, they're not as in vogue in the US. I would not try to be a new, project in 2023 doing a Saphs offering in the US. I would not recommend that, regardless of, my speculation and conjecture. Now, so for that reason, we see a lot more of safe the token warrants, which to your point, Kit, yes, it is sort of like, why does most of the money go to the equity? I will say, just to make things more confusing, sorry, there is a good argument too for certain investors that'll say, well, these devcos, they build out important IP, closed IP that maybe the project can use or sell or get acquired, into. So there are valid arguments that the equity could turn into something later. I think it's also one of the things like time will tell, and we'll also see that 99.999% of them didn't turn into anything. But, that's the name of the game, right? Price rounds is more of a function of the older days in VC, right? Still is used, but is a more mature toward a sort of offering because it's more expensive on the equity side.
Got it. And last question in this kind of realm is like, if the play is really for the token warrants, could a project just keep on doing safe plus token warrants for subsequent raises and never effectively have a price round? And, and then the token warrant could still exercise independent of the equity, right?
Yes. Yeah. So good question. So that's yet another thing where it's like, well, we're never really gonna have a price. You know, we raise safe and token warrant. We did our offshore structure. Token comes out. You know, the warrant piece is fulfilled, and it's like investors will be like, okay, there'll be no disputes, no problems that their agreement for future equity is never really made into actual equity. And guess what? If the project becomes big and the investors go, hey, we need to do a price down, they're like, okay, 50K, whatever. We're a mature protocol now, right? Like we're flush. We have a healthy treasury. We have a healthy, DevCo bank account. Here you go, fine. But the warrant's already been fulfilled. So, that's where the recourse would come. Now, again, one other piece though, that I just to make it again, one more time, a little contrarian and confusing. I do think safe and token warrants, sorry guys, this is what lawyers do, right? I do think safe and token warrants on the investor side provide enforcement protections, right? Greater than Saphs do. Because what Saphs say is they go, hey, Dave, here's the Saph between you and Kit, right? You and capital K. We're going to give you X. You gave me $1 million for, let's say, 1 million tokens. Then the Saph has 30 pages of risk factors. I know. I wrote these. I've done Saph. I've done a ton of these deals. I've done every kind of deal. But you would have 30 pages of risk factors that the token may not behave as expected. It's an as-is warranty. The token might not even come out. And so what has happened and what we've been dealing with on the firm side as far as this cycle when it comes to disputes is when there is a Saph, typically it's very hard to enforce because the investor, it's like buyer beware. And these are sophisticated investor, right? It says, hey, we may not even launch a token. So what we see with a lot of projects is post SBF, it's like, hey, crypto blew up. Oh, we were on Solana. So, Solana got a lot of activity. You can still launch a token. You know what I mean? But it's like an easy out. And it's it's a slow rug. So with the safe and token warrant, you can at least get them onshore. And so I think for those reasons, that does kind of push it back into, So it's really this weird middle space,
Yeah, it's like the best of both worlds. It's like, provides some protection to the investors while providing legal protection to the projects themselves.
Right. Because going offshore, if it's like a Swiss association or a Swiss foundation or a Cayman BVI model, you're going to try to sue it over there. It's going to be very expensive. And again, these Saphs will say, we may not even give you a token. May not work the way it may just blow up. Like there's 1 million of them, 1 million. And so, And
this leads really well to my next question. And this goes into structuring for projects. Yeah, you have onshore, you have offshore, you have Cayman foundations, you have, Swiss foundations, you have all these different types of entities. What are you seeing out there right now in the wild? And, what do you recommend to projects?
Sure. So I'm most a fan of either safe and token warrant onshore, right? Like if it's a US team with Cayman BVI structure offshore for your token piece, right? I've also seen safe and token warrant onshore with a Swiss association or a Swiss foundation. So first looking at the Swiss piece, Swiss foundations, that's the EF, right? The Ethereum Foundation is a Swiss foundation. First, they're very hard to form, Swiss foundations, because again, I'm not a Swiss lawyer and I'm not a Cayman BVI lawyer for all of this, but I've done it a lot. I'm very close to the MME guys in Switzerland. And I've gone through a ton of these structuring calls and projects. So Swiss foundations, you typically have to capitalize them with actual fiat, actual cash. You can't use stable coins. So that means you need to have a Swiss bank account. Getting a Swiss bank account is not like opening a Chase account here in the US. It just doesn't work like that, right? So you have to capitalize it with actual fiat. Then Second, you have to have ongoing compliance to sort of, prove to Switzerland that it is in fact a nonprofit foundation, right? And in that way, it's tax optimized, but it still has an administrative burden. Dissolving a foundation is supposed to be incredibly hard in Switzerland, right? So if people want to like Google around and go, Swiss Association, like EF or Swiss Association Crypto, there's a lot of articles that say, hey, the real actual best structure in Switzerland isn't a Swiss foundation, but actually a Swiss association, because they're easier to set up. Ongoing compliance is a little less stringent, and you can dissolve them if in fact you needed to, right? Again, I think the issue with the Swiss offshore model is the administrative and ongoing compliance. It's a pain in the ass. You need to have someone on shore over there. You got to get your books done. There's a ton of just ongoing pain in the butt requirements, let's say. For that reason, I'm a greater fan of the Cayman BVI model. And that's where you have a Cayman foundation with a BVI subsidiary, right? Why do you have the two? Because a lot of reasons, right? But the Cayman Foundation has VASP, or Virtual Asset Service Provider, right? Virtual Asset Service Provider regime. So does BVI. So they both have VASP, but BVI has like VASP Lite. This is normal, rigorous VASP. Here is VASP Lite. They still have, requirements and things you need to do. But what BVI allows also a public sale, whereas Cayman does not allow that, right? So here, actually, I made a little drawing.
Hell yeah.
So for everybody, right? So, and again, not legal advice. Get a lawyer.
I'm not your lawyer. No advice.
Yes. I can be if you want me to be. DM me on Twitter.
Where can they find you on Twitter?
Ryon Nixon, RYON. Got in early, man. I didn't have to buy it. So look, in this structure, this is a US DevCo, right? So they do a safe and a token warrant. They spin up their Cayman BVI. The Cayman Foundation is really sort of the offshore piece that interacts with the DAO. They handle their, the protocol, proposals, etc. The BVI subsidiary, this is where the token is issued, distributed. Again, there's different variations on this. There's so much more that this kind of structure does. But if that's helpful. Now, what happens offshore, Cayman BVI, you raise onshore with your safe and token warrant. Now, when you exercise your token warrant, it's typically BVI that would fulfill it. So just to give people a visual, this is where, this will go to investors, maybe sometimes the community. It really depends where a project is and it's in its launch, in its life cycle, right? I have seen projects where most of the time the treasury is with Cayman almost from the start, outside of just this distribution of tokens. I've seen a split treasury. I've seen another model over there where they have another sub, like another Cayman sub that they park, like just to have things structured for liability purposes offshore. So it can get complicated, right? But at a high level, BVI deals with the token, kicks back the remainder of the treasury. The Cayman Foundation deals with the DAO. I think that's sort of a simple explainer. Does that make sense? I feel like I just rambled.
That makes sense. Different jurisdictions for different purposes.
Yeah, the diagram helped a lot.
All right. Now with all that background and context about structuring, raising, all that in order, let's get into the heart of it, the meat of it. Let's get into the war stories. Have you seen any structuring where it's structuring gone wrong? Are there some disagreement between the investors and the projects and just got a little dicey?
Sure. Yeah. Talk about structuring. There's been a lot, I think, in the media, in crypto Twitter, on CoinDesk, Decrypt, whatever, around some of these interesting jurisdictions like the UAE. So we just did a UAE deal. It was like an interesting equity deal, like for a services company. The second part of it was this equity deal came with a 4x multiplier for their protocol, which was going to be like a Cayman structure, right? We said, cool, let's do a UAE deal. It was like a simple equity purchase, did all the docs, got it looking right, spoke to one firm and they were like, this is great. Pretty similar to US corporate work, I thought. Then spoke to another firm just to double check, because again, we're not UAE lawyers and we need somebody to sort of bless the deal. We talked to this other UAE firm, and it turns out for equity to be given in the UAE and to be enforceable by an investor, you actually have to get it like notarized and like stamped and put into this public registry, which is again very different than the US, right? So was a very interesting sort of scenario where we had this deal, we got it closed, we thought it was done. We spoke to two, one UAE counsel was like, yeah, this is fine. Spoke to another and they're like, no, there's no way investors can ever enforce their right. And, they should have an enforcement right. This will be a problem. Here, let's fix it up. And then let's also just build in this really cool Forex multiplier for their subsequent protocol that they're going to build out. Like getting all that wrapped up, tied into a bow, speaking to investors going, hey, it's going to take a little bit longer, but we got it. Here's why. I mean, I don't know, man. So I guess what's the lesson learned in that is for projects that are trying to do something interesting and jump into some other jurisdiction and, hey, I'm going to get spun up in Hong Kong or do this over here. Like, that's fine, but make sure you do not use just some basic counsel you found online. Talk to a couple lawyers in that jurisdiction, or you could get in a lot of trouble because had this one piece not been discovered, I mean, the client might have got sued. Maybe investors wouldn't have sued for their equity right, but the client would have gotten sued, personally for, maybe not doing this right. It was fine, but it was just this interesting, lessons learned, which I think is really just a part of being in this space where, you have to try new things, right? Like in 2018, 17, we went towards Malta or Luxembourg, right? We looked at some of these jurisdictions and we realized it's not that easy to get a bank account over there. It's not that easy to do business. So founders should really just look at hey, can I actually execute, get a deal done, fundraise, do whatever I'm trying to do in one of these jurisdictions? How can investors enforce their rights? That's important. If you're going to ask for money from people, you should consider the other side of that exchange and any weird, variances or nuances because of the jurisdiction. That was an interesting deal. We did another offshore deal where one of the founders, which very well, good group, great group. They're doing great. One of the founders had a bit of an issue with one of their investors and didn't want his investor to have, a certain allocation. Spoke to the investor, basically pushed him around. A very sophisticated investor too, and said, hey, look, I don't want you on my cap table. I want to buy you out. Bought him out with his own money with a premium, took his allocation. And this was an older project and it had done very well. Investor was not happy. Investor wants to send a little note and it's like, hey man, you signed all this. And
you signed it.
Yeah. See ya, brother.
Wow.
That was pretty interesting. Yeah. We've seen some other sort of, I think, interesting retrades, let's call them, where, for example, we had a project that was being incubated by some VC. The incubated VC, they, what was the issue? Oh, man. I forgot what it was. Okay, let's skip that one. Let's skip that one.
There's too many war stories.
Yeah. And actually, I think what's interesting for this cycle, something that, is at least for people or participants that want to stay in the space and have gotten some good value. There's been some interesting sniping of FTX claims, right? Where we went through a deal, buying some of these assets of the estate. And it's interesting. I mean, it's, a lot of it's confidential, a lot of it's public, right? But, there's some really good deals being made, for people that want to stay in the space that are trying to snipe some of these claims. And some have in fact been sniped for some really good prices. So, hopefully out of SBF's ashes, these VCs, some of them very new in the game, especially with these FTX deals, will rise like a phoenix as, the next Evangelions or whatever you want to call it, Evangelius. How do you say it? For this next cycle. How do you say the word? I can't say it. Evangelist.
Evangelist.
Yes, there you go.
Evangelist. Evangelians. Evangelius.
Evangelion, like the favorite old story out of it.
Evangelion. How many times can we say that word? How many different ways can we say that word?
Okay. And Ryan, quick question regarding the structuring. You showed basically there is a devco, which is in the US, offers the token warrant, and obviously the safe accompanies with that. Then there is this BVI, where it acts as like then there's the Cayman, which acts as like the off-chain DAO equivalent. And then there is a BVI that issues the token when it does come out, and that token goes into that Cayman entity, right?
Yeah,
and
into the treasury, give it out to investors.
Yep.
Maybe the founding team. Again, there's lots of variations, but that's right. Yeah, go ahead.
And then because when I saw that in my mind, I was like, God forbid a project fails. Like, what happens in that situation when a project fails and they have to unwind all of that?
Okay. Well, so first, on the Cayman Foundation piece, really what happens to the Cayman Foundation is some of these assets are housed there. It has its own like independent director, which again, is something else for projects to know. If you do an offshore structuring sort of deal or, procedure or whatever, that's your structure for your raise. If that's what you're using, you should use an independent director. You should use a professional director. We have seen projects. If you want to know the war story, we have seen projects where we have this whole offshore structure and they put their friend, right, who is a U.S. person as a director, or they put some other non, like, the director is supposed to be like the independent adult in the room, right? And they charge a decent fee, but they're not doing that. Like, they're taking on massive risk. They're taking on massive liability on making sure anything they stamp like is in fact like legit, correct. So, it is important to use a independent director. So those are those 2 points with that. To get to your question now, Kit. So yeah, Sam, to get to your question, to dissolve, to really wind up everything. Obviously on the US side is not that hard. You got to make sure you have no like creditors or people you owe money or anything to, usually creditors, not like equity holders. But if you're out of money, you just file a simple dissolution with the state of Delaware or wherever it is, some other filings. It's a very, it's more administrative. It's not a big deal. Cayman BVI can be a little more involved. It depends how long the company's been around, what it's done. There's some tricky nuances to it. I will say what's interesting is, and I don't know if I mentioned this on the Swiss side, it's a lot harder to sort of wind down these structures, right? At least the Swiss Foundation. Now, what happens when they wind down? It really like depends, right? We worked a bit with Rory at the end. When they were winding down, and a lot of their assets were handled through governance, which again, I think for all of these projects, let's still keep, you should still do all your stuff on chain. You should still do it in your community. Just because you have a Cayman Foundation, to your earlier point, Kit, the DAO is still out here. It relates a little bit. It's associated with the foundation for like giving out grants and, signing other documents, but you still want to keep all your stuff on chain. You still want to keep it decentralized or work towards it or wherever it is, right? But so again, going back to dissolution or dissolving a protocol, it can be pretty challenging. Putting all your assets through governance, see how it's going to get distributed. Maybe it's like a buyback and burn based on, you burn as many tokens that were in your wallet, you get some sort of USDC back. I think what's interesting though with that question is, outside of a protocol that's been hacked a bunch of times, or has, just like blown up in one way or another, it's really hard to force it sometimes, especially if the charter doesn't contemplate taking direct action pursuant to whatever the DAO says. So if you want another tip, DAOs should be clear that whatever structure they set up, Swiss, Singapore, Cayman BVI, some newfangled jurisdiction, whatever that entity is that's supposed to be like supporting the DAO, make sure it is supporting the DAO and the DAO has control over it, right? There was something in the news about, I think it was like Aragon DAO.
Aragon DAO, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and how the token holders passed one proposal, but the foundation blamed the lawyers and was like, oh, we can't do a buyback because then it makes, the token, it makes a financial instrument, and that cuts at utility. There's a lot of, and again, I don't know the facts, not a Swiss lawyer. I barely looked at something. I reviewed the articles and they came out, but it's a cute thing, right? When the foundation is like, oh yeah, lawyers, yeah, this will cut at utilities. So sorry guys, you're not happy with us. We're just going to hold on to this fat treasury while we figure out what to do. You know what I mean? That's not the way this is supposed to be played. Mm-hmm. That's not the purpose of these structures. These structures should support the DAO. They should support on-chain activity, right? By where you have to do things here in the meat space, right? You can sign an agreement. You can get a deal done. Investors are comfortable. Other service providers that aren't just deep crypto are comfortable. So I think for those reasons, having some sort of structure is important and for liability purposes, right? I think that's one of the big, knockdown effects of OPDAO and all of that, right? Is if you don't have some structure in which to relate or associate or to whatever, wrap your DAO, probably associate is the best word, you could be found liable yourself. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. Now, what do projects do? They should have a proper foundation. They should have some structure standing in front of them for these activities, right? And that doesn't mean every token holder needs to have a foundation, or there needs to be 55,000 foundations with, directors on all of them. Protocol should have one, right? Protocol can also say, hey, look, we're going to park this much aside in fees or for a treasury for a legal defense fund. I don't know if I spoke about this on the last podcast, but that's something else they can consider. There's a lot of interesting things and options and strategy that these projects can build in when designing this, right? And again, I just think you just think about it a bit and talk to a lawyer.
Yeah, in terms of one of the earliest DAOs, we've seen SNX have a multi-DAO structure. You've seen a MakerDAO go from DAO to foundation, now back to DAO. What do you think of, what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean,
SNX quite well, I imagine.
Yeah, know them very well. I think it has been interesting because of OkiDAO, because of some of this regulatory just FUD. I do think projects should have some sort of foundation or some sort of structure. I think some of them might be looking at, maybe having a foundation for parts of it, right? For the treasury, for one of their DAOs. I think projects can go, I think absent a very healthy treasury, a lot of activity, projects don't need, one Cayman Foundation for this, another Cayman Foundation for this, a suite of BVI subs. There's always, for projects that are trying to get too strategic, there are always a lawyer for that.
There's always a lawyer. Someone will always take those fees.
Someone will take that fees.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They'll say, oh, you want to have, this, and this. You want full liability protection? Let's park every activity in its own vehicle. Sure. If you have $1 billion in there just for structuring, then let's talk about it, right? But you don't have to do all that. So, I do think that is something we have seen with some projects. Again, if it's a healthy DAO, they have some sort of liquidity arm, or, they have some of their own personal market making things, or they want to do ecosystem fund. Yes, maybe pop that out in its own foundation or have that in a separate structure managed by other people. You got to talk to a lawyer. It's a lot more than that. But, you don't have to overthink some of these stuff, right? You have enough really cool stuff to build than to spend 35% of your mind share on, interesting offshore structuring.
Yeah. I feel like it's the lawyer's job, let the builders build, and if you get good lawyers, let them do all that work and worry about all that.
Yeah. Get your structuring done, get it done quick, get you off the ground, and, go back to work. You should not sit in the way. That's the name of the game. So.
Got it. And Ryon, I got a question regarding litigation, because I don't really hear much litigation between, projects and their investors, or project to project litigation, just because, this is crypto and a lot of things just kind of settle on chain. Do you have any litigation war stories or things kind of behind the scenes that we probably didn't hear of and the headlines never caught?
Litigation stories. I think it's been interesting. I've seen a lot of some projects or disputes that are potentially going forward with litigation, so I probably shouldn't comment on at all. I have seen a few interesting scenarios where, say, again, a project, this would be a different project, but wasn't happy with some of their investors, wasn't happy with some of the, actions of core team members, just sort of rage quit, and some of the craziness around that. Let's say if a key person were to leave, it can be really tricky with respect to, what that person knows. They came up with some interesting bonding curve or whatever it is, how that can be sort of handled, especially when, say, in this one scenario, the founder was not in a comfortable situation, wanted to get out, but sort of had some of the secret sauce. And, the company was like, we're not cool with that. We're going to get you, having to negotiate that, hey, look, this guy is leaving. It'll never get built. Better off, working with some other person, bringing in some other tech person that can build this thing, and, let my guy do his own thing. Do all that while, all of these regulatory actions are coming out. There's all this crazy fun. Get that person out, get him, properly set up. I mean, it was just crazy. What's another one? We've been looking at a couple of claims with respect to, I don't know if I can say the name. I don't know, guys.
Don't say the name.
There's yeah, but if I describe the facts, you'll know exactly who they are.
Okay, got it.
What's another one?
So it sounds like litigation is all around happening under the
spring.
scene.
I mean, maybe crypto winter, but it's litigation spring.
Yeah. The only litigation we hear is with the SEC coming in hot, right? But aside from that, we don't really hear much PvP litigation.
I mean, yeah, you don't really hear much about it, but speaking of recent things we've seen pop up in Discord chats, we saw something pop up in the Barnbridge Discord about the SEC. We saw something about a class action lawsuit in the Faye Discord, which looked mighty interesting. Actually, two different things. You have the class action and you have the SEC. What's your take on those two different situations going on, both Barnbridge and Faye?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I think the class action piece was like plaintiffs' lawyers dropping
NFTs.
NFTs that say, hey, you can be a part of this class action, sign up here, click for the website, right?
This is the real Web3 social right here, everyone.
Well, what I think is interesting, it's crypto. Again, if you guys, something that we could feel cool, I guess, in the space as we've matured to this level where crypto has created its own sort of, sketchy, scammy, ambulance chasing, fake crypto lawyers, right? Hey, join up for this class action. Class actions, I don't know if you guys know, but it's known in the legal community, class actions are one of the last bastions of big upside for plaintiffs' lawyers. Sorry, not for you guys, for me. For lawyers. I'm not a class action lawyer, but it's not this major benefit to the community. It's just some lawyers that are going to churn tons of fees and hopefully get that approved by the court. And, the class will get, $5, $5 USDC per, 10,000 Fay or whatever it is. I have no clue, right? So that's what I think the interesting takeaway on that one. On the SEC side, I saw that tweet by the Barnbridge lawyer, and I will say I do have some direct experience dealing with SEC inquiries, subpoenas, and the like. Right? I don't know the facts of Barnbridge. I don't know why their lawyer did that. I will say I do think it was a bit, maybe not weak is the word, but it was very conservative. I don't know. Maybe the lawyer had been given that direction by the founder. But to be clear, and just to address FUD, the SEC cannot say, hey, Dave, we're looking at you. Shut it all down, buddy. You're over, right? They can't do that. They cannot do that, right? They could say, hey, Dave, we want to know what you're doing. And then they give you an info request, right? If you were forced to shut down your stuff, they would have to have a court order, right? Even when they think it's a fraudulent or criminal enterprise, they show that to a judge, maybe before talking to you. But then that wouldn't even be the SEC, that'd be the DOJ, because the SEC is not a criminal agency, right? They don't have that authority. That they cannot do that. They're civil, right? So, but let's use this as just like a good place to like look at what these things are, right? So it seems to me, and again, I could be wrong, but what Barnbridge, their lawyer was saying is they caught maybe an info request, right? And an information request is where the SEC goes, hey guys, we're interested in what you're doing. Turn over all docs related to your token, related to investor communications, related to, the utility of a token, et cetera, right? What that is voluntary. You're not compelled to respond. The hook to that, though, is if you don't respond, they'll probably get a subpoena, right? And subpoena is sort of the next level where they say, hey, we're letting you know, we're looking at you, here's a Wells notice, here's a subpoena, turn this stuff over, you have to, right? Or there will be some sort of penalty. And then they can even like increase it to something criminal, and get you in trouble, get DOJ and then get you in trouble, right? Mm-hmm. The third level is an actual enforcement action. And that's where the SEC, group, whoever's leading this enforcement group, that based on all the materials that you've turned over, either pursuant to an info request or subpoena or both, they make a recommendation, and the SEC, the commissioners say, yes, let's do an enforcement action. No, let's not do an enforcement action. And here is where really I do think Gensler has power, because he isn't a solemn dictator, but they likely give him strong deference, even if there is some disagreement with, say, Hester Pierce or whatever, right? Now, at all these levels, at the info request level, again, get a lawyer. You don't turn over your docs. If a project is contacted by the SEC, like, just get a lawyer. And projects should also know, like, there are ways to handle, dealing with a regular inquiry that isn't going to kill them. And if Barnbridge was a regular inquiry without more facts, and again, like, please, like, cut whoever that attorney is some slack. There's a lot of things that he probably knows that he isn't able to say publicly, right? But get an attorney. You don't turn over every single doc. Your attorney should look at those and go, no, these are relevant to the inquiry. These are privileged because you have an attorney. Another good reason to have an attorney, especially right now, right? But the idea that, I've seen this on crypto Twitter, that the SEC is going after a lot of smaller projects. I think that's a little bit of misinformation, meaning the SEC, again, could just send you an inquiry, right? And it could be a short one. It could be a long one. It could be something in between. Sure, they're looking at you, but it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean everything's going to blow up. It could, again, project specific, but that isn't like the end of it, right? It's usually just, they're just looking at you. We've done, so look, at the firm, it's done maybe 9 now, like inquiries dealt with, like, or like SEC actions.
It's just
let's
a
say,
part of
one flavor.
business, these inquiries.
It is. And I mean, like, look, over 6 years, I don't think is that bad either, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we've worked with a lot of projects, but in them, you turn over some stuff, you're friendly, you're professional, you're dealing with other lawyers, but like, again, you're still an advocate for your client. Most of the time what happens is they don't say, like the SEC will never say, okay, cool, you turn over everything. Thanks, you guys are good. Good luck to you, right? Instead, what they'll do is after the inquiry, if it's satisfied, they just sort of ghost you, and you're like, you need anything else? And they just don't respond, right? Because they want to leave the door open for later. Again, we've dealt with these projects that like after this or before this or whatever, they have been fine. They have gone on to do great things. So again, I think we have to try to combat this FUD. And sure, I'm not going to lie. I do think it's a little crazier in this space right now than it has been prior. But I mean, it's not always going to be that way. And, again, it's just, these are the challenges of this cycle.
So, and just to recap, go ahead.
Real quick. It was a really, big section. So I just wanted to make sure I condense it for all the folks listening, is that when the SEC comes at you, they come in effectively 3 phases. And the first one is just an informal investigation where they basically drop a letter saying like, hey, we're looking at you. We want to see some stuff. Here's some of our light inquiries. And they can range, right? The range of these inquiries. Then once they see through that, and whether you respond or don't respond, they can escalate it to a formal investigation. This is when they send in like a subpoena and more scary legal words come at you. All right. Now, here's when you kind of have to take it super duper seriously, because the next action after this is called an enforcement action. And that's when this is like, they're sending in the Valkyries and just kind of they're coming after you in a real way. Right. Like, those are the 3 phases.
And then when you fight FUD, it's 4. It's 4 when you fight the FUD.
When you overcome, it's 4.
When you overcome.
Yeah, when you overcome. Right.
That's the final page.
Just as probably a good exemplar for some of your viewers. Do you remember? I forgot the actual date, but Coinbase was like, "Hey, look, we've been nothing but cooperating with the SEC. Look, we got hit with this Wells notice. These guys are going to bring an enforcement action." That was like step 2. Step 1 was really what they alluded to, was they've been cooperating with them, right? Because with some of these inquiries, we did do one where we had to turn over some docs. They invited us in to speak in their branch, right? Not DC, in their like local SEC branch, do a presentation, right? And then they gave us like some things that they thought were an issue. No fine. Okay, not a problem, right? But it can range. It could range from a million different permutations. They could have a very long document request, in which case, again, please, and this is in the first stage, right? Please have a lawyer look at that, because maybe some of it isn't relevant. Who knows? Maybe it is, and you really should respond because they suspect you of fraud, because you don't want some sort of like informal investigation, again, because you didn't want to respond, or you're like, oh, this is voluntary. Then they turn around and now they're upset, right? And then they subpoena you. I wouldn't do that. But I do think the idea that, because the SEC is looking into projects, they're blowing up smaller protocols. I don't think that's fair at all, right? I think, it is what it is. And, the regulator can ask you for stuff, but have proper counsel. They can cut the fat. They can, help get through this process. And, really founders shouldn't be doing this on their own in this situation, specifically.
Yeah. That actually leads very well to my next question. Over the past few months, we've seen the SEC come after Coinbase really aggressively. We see them go after Binance. What is your take on, the case, especially with Coinbase? Because Coinbase seems to be the one that's like, all right, like, we're going to take the fight to you. Like, we're going to actually sue the SEC. Like, all we want is clarity. All we want is, answers and a definition. And we've been asking for this for almost a decade at this point.
Yeah. I think with respect to these 2 cases, they definitely picked a fight with probably 2 of the most well-capitalized participants in the space. I really, really hope it doesn't turn into this sort of, Ripple part 2 and 3. Kind of feel for Binance, because they're dealing with both the SEC and the CFTC, right? We'll see how that goes. But I do think the SEC picking a fight with Coinbase, if anything, there will be, through some bloodshed, right? some sort of nuggets of clarity, some things that like go in our favor. And I mean, frankly, a new administration could change a lot of things as well. So, you know, it's, I think, really hard to tell where it'll go. I do think it's interesting. Probably one of the most expensive like responses to the SEC action, like Coinbase put together. You know, I don't know. Again, I'm not these top tier, you know, litigators, but I felt like they could have threw some more, you know, some more aggressive arguments and some interesting, more new novel arguments in there. Look, and I hear on my armchair, that's very easy for me to say versus in there in the arena in this situation. So again, I always want to give counsel like proper respect, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. It's not going to be, I think, a slam dunk for the SEC by any stretch of the imagination.
No. And do you feel like the way the SEC has, you know, been acting, like, do you feel like the SEC is losing momentum, or do you feel like they're like as stronger than ever?
I do think, I mean, look, they increased their budget. They hired a bunch of other enforcement lawyers. So, I mean, that's sort of, again, the name of the game, right? Do I think this is going to be like big trouble for crypto? No, I don't think so at all. And I do think really we will be here until like this becomes a big enough issue, right? That the US will deal with it, or like, you know, eventually everybody will be overseas. And if the US wants to, you know, play that, like take that route, I mean, that'll suck. That'll suck for us that are here in the US that are committed to the space for life. Like, you know, but I don't think it's going to go that way. I think what we'll see is we see a lot of heat right now, or like, you know, like let's say the last month, it's calming down a little bit. I think there's going to be a lot of focus, the SEC's focus on these two actions. I do think that it cost the SEC an email, you know, they give you a piece of paper like that. It's, you know, it's a template. So they changed 3 things. They put Dave, they have tons of precedent where they could just go ask any and all communications related to your token, investor communications, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's not hard for them to take 2 SEC people, right? One senior enforcement attorney and then their junior, right? Attorney, and say, hey, Dave, give me all this stuff, right? That's one thing. Bringing an enforcement action has a team, like, you know, it costs money. All those lawyers, like, they need to be focused to like win this. Again, the SEC is not going to be bringing enforcement actions either where it's like, oh, this is going to be hard, right? Like, we got to fight with these guys. Coinbase and Binance, they're taking other things, like other sort of claims versus like a project, right? But, you know, setting that aside, bringing many enforcement actions, even if they hired, you know, a ton of lawyers, like it in the public perception of the regulator would be even worse, right? It's like, you know, we don't want to completely fucking push crypto out. Why would they do that? You know what I mean? I think once you get into the details and you look at, hey, it doesn't take a lot to like ask for an inquiry, but to bring an action does take a lot of resource. How many of these can they sustain? You know, I don't think it's going to be like a million of them, right? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make like, you know, basic fiscal sense for the agency to do it. And again, they have to be careful about who they bring actions against, because if they get bad precedent, that can mess up everything. And, you know, for the SEC. And I have heard some of these like CLEs, like these continuing legal education, or like, you know, securities law updates. And I mean, lawyers talk about this. They go, hey, the SEC is very careful about who they bring enforcement actions against, because bad precedent could mess up the whole agency. So, you know, similarly here, again, it's not like, you know, the only reason why we see some of these enforcement actions for other protocols that were, you know, from 2018 to 2019, they just, you know, they brought some older projects. They've been putting together a case against them for a while. Now, is that going to continue for this next cycle? We'll see. But I do think like it's high time for just everybody that's just sort of come together and like say, hey, this is the way to do things. You know, it's getting closer and closer to that point. Maybe that's just hopium.
Absolutely. And you know, speaking of getting everyone together, I want to take the battle out of the courtroom and into the arena of public opinion. What do you think crypto can do to better get just the general public on their side. Because, you know, right now the media, especially in the States, they like to portray crypto as like, oh, this like arena, this like, you know, it's very foreign, esoteric. It's like this casino, blah, blah, blah. Like, what can crypto do to do a better job in this arena of public opinion, especially here in the States?
Yeah. Advocate for and be models for better transparency, right? You know, put the stuff that not only like you want everybody to see, but maybe be thoughtful about the things that everyone should see, you know, right? Investor stuff, team stuff. I think that's important. I think transparency reports are important. We've seen some projects do these like learning modules, right? Here's how you can use a protocol. Here's what you do with it. Here's what the token's for. Here's how to like use it within the protocol. Sure, it takes a little more in development work, but if a project is trying to like keep themselves, again, you know, you're doing some fraudulent or there's a million reasons why a regulator would want to look at you, but just everything being the same, something projects can do to like put them less at a you know, a threat of enforcement level is transparency. Like, have anybody, like any user, understand what your project does, understand the risks, and even generally at a greater level, understand the risks of crypto and using crypto and getting hacked, or, you know, like agreeing to some stupid permission and getting some like poison injection attack to your MetaMask. Like, you know, you don't have to do all these things, but if projects just go, hey, look, here's how you use our stuff. Here's some of the risks of crypto, and all this is, you know, online. You can, you know, rewrite it a million different ways, use ChatGPT and, you know, put it out there. But like, you know, projects should focus on, hey, someone first coming on this platform, what does the protocol do? What does the token do? What's the DAO look like? What's like, you know, again, shout out to Sam. All praises be. I bet the knee. Here's a P&L. Here's how the team is done. Here's what we've done over the last 3 months. Here's what we built out. Here's what hasn't gone well. Here's what's been challenging, right? Like, here's what's troubling. Again, projects don't need to go, oh man, there's all this crazy stuff, like freak out. No. But, you know, it's the, like an adult way of showing what's going on under the hood. You know, it's saying like, here's the good stuff, but also, you know, like everything else, here's some stuff that's been challenging. And it is an art on how to display and talk about that. So again, I mean, I would consult with somebody, but that's what I say.
It's all about transparency, education, and I want to add one more thing in there. Sure. I think if we show how, you know, crypto is giving people jobs and employment and opportunities, that would go a really long way. You know, I know the traders get a bunch of attention. I know that's a sexy thing to put a spotlight on, especially in a bull market. But if we're able to show like, hey, like X amount of people are being employed in Web3 in this capacity. And in this past cycle, we had like the first, you know, real come up of DAOs, and, you know, some experiments went well, a lot of them didn't. But like now you have all these different people in crypto and in this Web3 economy. If we can show like, hey, this next cycle, like it's actually supporting jobs, you know, people are actually making a living through these DAOs and other Web3 organizations, I think that could go a real long way in normalizing crypto.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great point, Dave. And I mean, you know, to what you just said, you know, allowing, you know, crypto participants to travel where they want. Like, I mean, crypto's very international, right? We all know that. It's awesome. It's awesome. You meet some of the most interesting people, like doing the coolest things that like would do it for free, right? There's a ton of them, right? And sure, we could do well. We want success. We want economic, financial success, whatever, for sure. But like, you know, crypto, like, it has done so much for me, right? I'm sure it's done so much for you too. I mean, I would love for the second level of like adopting crypto to just get out of this, you know, let's just try to destroy it and be like, look what it does. You know, I think what DeFi could do, right, for younger people and their financial education, you know, I was a numbers guy in high school and college. Like I really, you know, I was like a math guy. I'm always into math. I know I'm a lawyer, but I like numbers more than words, really. And, you know, like I learned so much, even being a numbers person. You know, I did some finance stuff like in undergrad. You know, I'm not like some G, you know, but like I knew how to do things. I knew what options are, or whatever, et cetera. But it wasn't until I got really deep into DeFi that like it almost like expanded, the way I looked at things. And, it's such a real value. And like, instead of trying to smash crypto, if like we had programs where it's like, here, let's teach people how to use DeFi. Here's how it is a benefit. There are, better than giving it to a bank, put it over here, have your own control. Like you guys know this, right? Like,
absolutely.
I think, the day will come for that, but maybe it's not now.
I think it's just all about diplomacy, like taking everything you said there, like all that's possible with DeFi and with Web3, and showing, instead of just, I know like in crypto, we like to all go to like these conferences and stuff all over the world. And we like to hear like, oh, what's coming up next. But if we can build bridges, outside of crypto, like let's say instead of going to like this crypto conference, we go to like some Fed conference or some, TradFi picking conference, or, something that's like a little bit outside of the orbit, but, kind of has to do, especially with DeFi, and show like people in arenas outside of crypto, like, hey, this is what we're up to, and showing the innovation, showing what's possible to them. That could also go a long way as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there, guys. There's a lot the space can do.
Yeah. And that's what we're dedicated to that. Yeah.
It'll get there. It'll get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not going anywhere. You ain't going anywhere. I ain't going anywhere. Capital K, you going anywhere, brother?
No. We'll be right here every week like we've been doing for over a year. We have not missed a single podcast since we started in June of 2022. We've been going strong no matter where we are in the world.
So I love that, man. I mean, shout out to you too, really. Like, and it's, gentlemen like yourselves, like me, that like are here. It's going to be hard. We'll have to change how we do things. We'll have to change how stuff gets done. But like, we're lifers. And I think that there's more in this space than any other. And man, that gives me hope every day.
Married to the game.
I
know I can't do anything else. like all my job skills are just like dedicated to this one niche. Just
You're stuck, brother.
Yeah, I'm just stuck. I'm stuck in Fraxland. Find me on FrxChain. I'll be like stuck in a tent on the side of the mempool.
Front running, brother.
we just put front running. That's not cool.
No math days.
Yeah. In our like producer chat, well, Phil just said like, yeah, you'll be a Frax book on the side. I'm like, yeah. I'll be with my little cloak, seeing all the transactions go by.
Well. Yeah, I don't know, guys.
I think this is a good place to end it. Kid, I'm not sure if you had any other questions.
No, not. I'm good. I'm all legaled out. I am good.
Yeah. I really like the arc of this whole pod, honestly. It went from like going deep in the weeds about raising all the different, ways you could raise Safe, Saphs, DAF, Robert Kraft, this and that. And then we went into like structuring this foundation, that DAO, this entity, this jurisdiction, that. And then, we went into all the cases and everything that's going on in legalese land. And then we just got like, okay, like, why are we here?
Yeah, how the SEC works.
Like, that's true. It wasn't nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I hope some of that stuff is valuable, guys.
Oh, I think it's incredibly valuable. I think, like, as Kit would say, like, we'll say this at the beginning, like, get out your pen and paper and take notes to this one for sure. Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry, man. I think like we trying to find like where you guys were going to go on things. So I didn't have much time to come up with some stories.
This was perfect. No. This was like exactly what we needed. I think we should just go into the lightning round. We have some new lightning round questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, really?
Okay. It's just been, I was going to say, we'll probably just wait another 6 months and you'll probably rack up another good war stories and come back on and just tell us, how did the whole FTX thing comes about.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm happy to.
All right. So the first lightning round question for me is, if you can go back in time or go forward in time, who would you want to have dinner with? Dead or alive?
I mean, honestly, if I could go forward in time, if I'm just trying to game the question, I would go way forward in time and have dinner with like some AGI, demigod and ask him, how to prevent Earthlings or humans extinction, or like, what should I focus on? To get me to the next level.
You would have dinner with Roku, and Roku would say like, yo, just help me out, bro.
Just touch me with your, demigod touch.
He would say like,
go Super Saiyan.
He would say like, go work for WorldCoin pro bono.
I don't know, guys. I'm not cool with anybody like scanning my, my eyeball, and I don't know, man.
Yeah,
respect to WorldCoin. I'm not doing that shit. Right?
It's all jokes here. All jokes.
All jokes. All jokes.
I want to ask the reverse of that. Like, out of anybody in the past or currently dead or alive, who would you have a beer with? Who would you want to have a sit down?
Oh man,
have a nice cold
in crypto
beer? No, it could be anybody. Anybody.
Man, guys, like I'm a New Yorker by heart. I don't know. I grew up on East Coast hip hop. I think Jay-Z would be like super cool, man. But
nice.
That probably would never happen.
Never say never.
Model after some, that's true.
He's still alive.
You want to model yourself after somebody like that guy did it right. That guy made his way in music when it wasn't supposed to be the way he wanted it, and he did things on his terms. I've really tried to design some of my entrepreneurship, in that same manner, and I don't know, it's cool.
Well,
so
he's not a businessman; he's a businessman.
Businessman.
Exactly.
I love how you're about to do.
Do some FrxETH, bro.
Oh, actually, yeah. That would be pretty sick. I have one more. Who would you recommend as our next guest here at Flywheel?
Oh, next guest. I would do Groom Lake. That's what I would do.
Who?
Groom Lake.
Groom Lake.
Yeah. Groom Lake. There are these like, they provide like protocol, like prevention service. Like someone's going to hack your chain. They're going to mess with you guys, or they mess with like your bags. Like you get SIM swap. Somebody like does, jack you for, a shit ton of crypto. These are the guys. I don't know if they do it. I think they probably would, but I would totally. I can speak to them and get them on here easy. But with all the scams theft and crazy stuff going around, I think they're a needed, necessary entity in this space. And they already are working for like some good protocols and projects and some high net worth individuals. I think they'd have a really interesting perspective. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, definitely got to dive into them more.
Yeah.
Especially
let me know.
The layer zero protection, basically.
Yeah. They'll find your guys. Like if you really need them to, they will find that person or that team that got you. Yeah. And if you like them to, they will protect your protocol. Like, just get them on here, talk to them.
There's so much stories, Kit.
Yeah. Oh, I know, but they're they're like ex NSA, so they might be even tighter. But they're cool. They're cool and they're interesting. If you want them on, let me know. I'm happy to make that happen.
Yeah, we will. And we can't wait for you to come on it again. This has been a great episode, Ryon. Thank you for coming on. Again, nothing here is legal advice. If you want a lawyer, Ryon is your guy. Thank you for coming on. Yeah, and excited to see you next time.
Cool. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me on. All right. Talk soon.
See ya. Welcome to the post game, everybody. I'm your host, DeFi Dave, here with Capital K. We are capping off a phenomenal interview with Ryon Nixon. Nothing said there is legal advice, but man, did we find a lot of that stuff useful. We went super deep into everything from raising, structuring, cases, and there's so much we got into, and we got deep in the weeds. Kit, what are your final thoughts on this one?
I felt like, not to pat ourselves on the back, but I'm going to pat ourselves on the back, that we kind of segmented this pod really well for the listeners to be able to tune into like just the instruments of raising capital part, or if they're interested in just how the SEC works, there's a section for that too. And we're able to kind of give people a lot of that almost behind the scenes, and it's like the if you know, because you wouldn't really know how the SEC works unless you receive one of those letters. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, and we've talked about that. How to segment podcasts and be like, hey, we should make this section about that and that and that. We literally just filmed a podcast yesterday And, I think we've done, a really good job in that regard in this one. Like a little bit for everything for everyone. If you want to like fast forward to this or rewind to that, we did a really good job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dave, what was your like key takeaway from this pod?
My key takeaway is how the game has changed. I remember back last cycle, the Saphs was the standard. And now it's more about like the safe with the token warrant. And it's like interesting to see how, legal advice evolves based on situations changing. And it just shows what a dynamic how dynamic of an environment we're in, especially in something as frontier and as cutting edge as crypto, because there's always stuff changing, always got to be on your toes and, ready to make adjustments when you need to.
Yeah.
What about you?
Agreed. I think it's also about the evolution of the structure to me. Mm-hmm. Remember back in 2017 is always like, oh, Swiss foundation or like, foundation in some, European country. And if you were to go anywhere else, it's kind of like not too kosher. And now fast forward, like the template to go after is like DevCo in the US, a Cayman entity that basically acts as the foundation. And then the foundation has this other subsidiary in the British Virgin Islands, BVI, to help issue the token. Now, this model I've seen on basically for the last almost a year and a half, that this was like the de facto model across all of the different projects I spoke to. Like everyone seems to be doing this mixed with the safe plus token warrant route.
Yeah. It's interesting to see like all the different things and everything that's done in the past and what's being done now. Like I felt like I was going to school here, honestly. Like everything was just like so detailed. And if I'm a founder, or if I'm, and if I'm about to like raise a round, like this is the podcast I want to be listening to. This is the podcast where I'm like taking notes. And this is a podcast where I'm going to a lawyer for legal advice, because nothing on here is legal advice, but I'm going to a lawyer and say like, hey, like, what do you think of this and that and that? And I think another big takeaway is, if you can be as creative as you want, you can be, as Ryon says, as strategic as you want. And you can go spend like a bunch in fees, or you can just get done what you need to get done and what you're comfortable with. I think what the most important thing is for you to be safe, for investors to be protected. And, there's a lot of things that you can do, as a project, such as transparency, and showing when those lockups end and, showing how things work on chain and showing, and just being a good actor and a transparent actor in the space.
Yeah, agreed. And another part that I felt really insightful was the SEC bit on the 3 stages. I think I've heard of that one time, but it's just like no one really breaks it down like that in more of the layman terms. Stage 1 is fairly casual but serious. Stage 2 is really serious, and stage 3 is oh shit serious. And, having, Ryon, who's kind of gone through the ringer, kind of like laying it down to us, like kind of quelling some fears, busting some FUD, I think was really, really helpful too.
Oh, yeah. I think that's one of the most important part of this podcast as well. It's the fighting of the FUD. Because, we see things on Twitter, we see people get hysterical. We see people say like, it's so over. But at the end of the day, it's like, this happened before in like a different way and different cycle, and things were even more dire back then because the space was that much smaller. Now, things are way more established. There are standard practices in place, and we're not going anywhere. It's just a matter of, how much of it will be in the US or how much is going to be scared offshore.
Yeah, agreed. And also, there's this funny thing that I just want to bring up. In one of my group chats, a buddy was like, there must be a TA chart specialist working at the SEC, because they seem to come out with like enforcement actions or just bad news at like the critical resistant point. So the price just like nosedives.
No, they know. They know.
Oh,
I mean, we're all in the same arena. And so whether it's with shit posting with memes or, saying like, oh, it's this time in the charts, drop it. It's like that meme of Young Thug and I think it's a little dark, and like Young Thug's like, no, you right there, like drop it. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I do not.
Okay.
But yes.
If you know what I'm talking, yeah. I wonder how many of the viewers here know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, drop a comment if you know what Dave is talking about. There's going to be some Flywheel merch for
young
you.
thug in the studio. If you know if you comment and let me know what it and guess what it is, and like just say I know, then like you may or may not get a Flywheel hat to your door.
Let's end this post game with a little cheery stuff. Like, I'm not sure if this is going to come out, before Dave or not. But if you wanted to invite some Flywheel homies, I think now's the time to do so.
Yes, ETC coming up, big time for Frax, big time for Flywheel DeFi, big time for myself. I'm only a small part in this. I will be speaking at 3 conferences. I am giving a speech at ETC about stablecoin maximalism, going over how stablecoin maximalism has developed as an idea over the past several months since Sam has spoken. And spoiler alert, it's happening. I'm on a panel. Kit, you're going to love this panel. I'm on a panel about stablecoin censorship resistance with Token Bryce, Benjamin from Mai, and the founder of Raft.
Oh, wow, dude. That's a good one.
I know. I'm just trying to have a good time. I'm just trying to have a good time, honestly. We're all in this together. And so if people want to come aggressive, so be it, but I'm going to be me and everyone just going to be smiling on stage. And then I am speaking at Jesse's Hacker House about DeFi and stablecoin maximalism. So I got 3 events I'm speaking at. And then we're having 2 events. We're having a happy hour with Frax, obviously Frax, our friends at Code for Arena and Barachain. Shout out to those guys, again, for hosting with us. And then, there's Dave. Which is basically my birthday party. All right, everyone. Yeah. This was a big episode, and we're going to keep coming at you with all these episodes week after week. So make sure you hit that bell button, subscribe, leave us a like. Let us know what you think in the comments. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Flywheel DeFi. Join the conversation on Telegram at Flywheel DeFi. You can follow me on Twitter at DeFiDave22.
You can follow me at 0xcapital_K.
And we'll see you next week. Everything said on this episode is not financial or tax advice. This channel is strictly for educational purposes and is not an investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any assets or to make any financial decisions. This video is not tax advice whatsoever. Please talk to your accountant and do your own research.